I can see that they've joined.
Yes, I can see they've joined live. The content of this meeting is being sent to a third party. Okay. Um, oh, it's being streamed to YouTube. Aha, right. So this is live streaming on YouTube as well. So that's where they've added that link. So we're recording, we're live streaming to YouTube. Hello, YouTube. For all those people joining us on YouTube. If that's how we're being live streamed, which is lovely. Um, and we're just waiting for the in the room to be able to get back to me to say tell me when to actually start. So I think I shall just wait till we can get a confirmation that I can start from the Fabian Society hosts. I think the Paul Tudor is there's Fabian's turned their microphone on. Aha! And hopefully that's all
You can
ready
hear
to
us
go.
now?
Now I can hear you. Yes.
You can hear us
Yep.
now? Yes, wonderful. So I was just saying, I had wonderful, got the technology working. My degree from Victoria University, but when back in the day, in 1990, we were dealing with relational databases, and we thought we were ahead of the curve. This was before the World Wide Web had even hit our desktops. We had this new technology called hyperlinks.
Yes.
So my degree is now redundant, I suspect, and I'm getting asked lots of questions at the office about AI and how can I use it to search our wonderful, vast resources that we have within our company. So tonight's topic is very relevant to me. Thank you. And Simon is, as I said before, when we were having technical difficulties, a senior professor for Victoria University of Wellington. He also stood for the Labour Party at the last election. Very brave man in the deep south. You stood in an electorate seat. Very brave. He's apparently, by all accounts, a wonderful presenter. All my friends in the South Island have said that you are the most incredible person to talk to around tech issues, and so therefore you were the person that we had to go to for this event. Thank you for doing this, Simon. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very, very kind. So I will just go and start sharing my screen, and I'll put myself in the bottom corner and go share. So this is the standard way I present to my students when I'm online, because when you're engaging online in something like this, it's useful to see me and also to see some content I'm going to talk about. Now, I don't want this just to be me talking the whole time, so I'm really interested in people interrupting me, asking me questions, and we can have some debates. I have quite a bit of material which we can wander through as the interest takes you. As an introduction, yes, indeed, my name's Simon McCallum. Ko William Wallace took tupuna, ko Fletcher, Joseph Fletcher Takawaka, ko Matilda Tokuawa, ko Taranaki Tamanga, ko Simon McCallum Tokuina. So my got Scottish background, and my deep connections arriving in New Zealand were into Matilda through the Joseph Fletcher. I did my PhD in AI and neural networks, and I was doing my stuff in neural networks when it was still not very cool, and it was kind of not a great thing to do because we were the weird kids who played with these neural networks, which were never going anywhere. Um, Surprisingly, like the Hopfield networks that I was using in the mid 90s, which are only 10 years after John Hopfield actually created them, he then won a Nobel Prize for last year. So it's kind of, oh, okay. So I was kind of on the right track, but yeah, not everyone else was doing the same thing. I've been teaching since '99 as I stood for Southland. I also got to be in the corner over there the an extra in Lord of the Rings. So I'm also a wild man in Lord of the Rings, and I burned down Rohan villages. So um, you're really doing interesting things. I currently work at Victoria University of Wellington, and I still have a 20% position in Norway and at CQU in Australia. So I'm kind of, yeah, trying to reach out to multiple education organizations, and also doing a bunch of work with the government around with DIA, government departments around frameworks for AI and the Real Society's guidance on AI for research, as well as Victoria University's guides for its students and teachers. So I thought I'd start with a few myths because most people come to these events and they know some stuff because they've been paying attention. They've come to an event. Woohoo! But some of what they've heard are not great. And so I'm going to start with some myths, and then later we'll talk about some myths and monsters. So bad things happening and impacts on society. And we have some future development stuff where some of what we're talking about with generative AI is scary about its impact, but some of the stuff that's happening in parallel in science around human neural organoids are even scarier. So if we can kind of have a wee look at that at the end and start thinking ahead of what we need to be worried about in future years rather than what we currently can see. So it's a myth-buff thing. So I'll start with Gen AI is just picking most probable next word. You'll hear this often. People say, oh, it's just picking the next most probable word. No, that is not the case. It doesn't pick the next most probable word. That's how it is tested. It's not what it does. What it does is work out the meaning of a sentence, and that random bit is where it picks out the closest word to what it's trying to say. So it comes up with a meaning and then uses probability to find the word closest to the meaning. So it's not that. It's just a montage of what it's been taught. It is not just a montage of what it's been taught. It isn't just scraping the internet, grabbing things and smashing them together. It is extracting relationships between words. It is extracting the meaning from sentences, smashing the meanings together, and then generating new sentences. So it is not what we'd think of as like a photo montage where it's just plastering things together. There's nothing new in AI. It's got no creativity. That's also false, partly because one of the problems AI has is called hallucinations. Hallucinations are it doing something new and novel that it shouldn't do because it's making stuff up. It can't both be not creative and making things up, right? So either you think it's not creative and therefore everything it says is true, or it has hallucinations and therefore creativity. Gen AI can replace all humans. No, it is very different to humans. And one of the biggest challenges we have as a society is that the alien way that AI is thinking means that our intuitions about its intelligence are wrong. So normally, if somebody can do, if they can write an essay, then we believe they can do things like boil spaghetti or something, right? Because we've got this hierarchy of these are hard tasks, and to do this hard task, you have to be able to do all the tasks that are easier than that. But that ordering doesn't work for AI. Sometimes it will do things that you can't because it's really, really good at this thing. But lower down things, it fails badly. So it's not a replacement. It is something different. And one of the last ones before I jump into how AI works is AI is learning from everything you submit to it. This is also not true. What AI, well, the current models at least, so all of this is just what the current models are doing. The current models don't learn from everything you tell them. What's happening is they store all the sentences you give them, and they store all the sentences they write. And then sometimes later, they'll take all of that information along with all the other stuff they've had on the internet and all the other stuff they've been trying to learn, and they'll compact that together, and then they'll learn from that stored information. But you can have models, as Microsoft does and as ChatGPT offers for the paid versions, where they delete all the conversations you have with them. And the model does not change at all from interacting with you. That is completely unlike normal humans, because every time I use my brain, I update my brain. Whereas with the AI, it can use its brain without updating its brain, right? Which is a very strange thing, right? It doesn't actually learn from any of the interactions you have with it. It only learns later when they have a learning phase. Okay, so some environmental myths and facts, seeing this was an environmental branch kind of thing. I was told that it's kind of partly that. So Generate uses lots of energy, a lot more energy than a Google search. That was true last year, but you would have noticed, hopefully, you've started seeing those Google AI summaries coming up when you do a Google search. Have people started noticing those? So maybe it's the same now because every Google search has an AI generated summary with it. So now we don't know that if a Gen AI thing is less or more energy than a Google search. Used to be, maybe not now. Like every question to ChatGPT uses 10 liters of water. Well, no, that's false. The claim was 10 milliliters per prompt, right? So that was the original claim from the research paper. And that's still false because that's not an accurate measure of using water. That's just an estimate of how much water it takes to cool the data center in Iowa. If you use air cooling or you have it somewhere else, or you do heat sharing, which they do in Scandinavian countries where you have a data center and it heats the hospital. So they use the water to heat the hospital and the hot water in the hospital. And so you use that heat somewhere else. That, like using up water, isn't a real thing. It is just about how you cool the places using the energy. Training a large model uses the same energy as a small country. Hopefully some of you have heard that kind of, oh, it's terrible, it uses a small country. Yeah, that's true, but it's kind of meaningless because like TY Point uses more energy than 90 countries in the world, right? So the out of the 220 countries, TY Point would sit above 90 of them in the amount of electricity it uses every day. So yeah, you've got to kind of understand what you mean by the scale of something like that statement. And in fact, the TY Point one, when you look at the amount of energy use currently, well, this was in December, sort of October, December last year, between November last year. TY Point uses about the same amount of electricity as all of ChatGPT worldwide. All the queries, all the training, all the thing. TY Point is using about the same amount of electricity per day. So in the scale of things, yes, that's a lot of power, but we also do other things that use that scale of power. So it's not infinitely worse than other things we do. However, the potential growth for energy use is concerning, and that is absolutely true. And we do need to worry about how we support electrical infrastructure and have these large models. Right. So with some of those myths started, let's dig in and kind of work out like how does this stuff actually work? Now, how these large models work is important to understanding what they're good at and what they're bad at. And that's partly what we have to understand when we're going to make policy or think about using them. Understanding how they work is really important. So this was the tokenizer for ChatGPT 4.0. And I gave a talk to DIA, so I'm using their one. I actually tried this on the Labour Party's website, but it appears the people who are writing the copy for the Labour Party use simple words, and so I couldn't find enough compound words or Maori words to get an interesting example. So I'll still use the DIA one. But here you can see things like Tonoi is 3 tokens, and it's because it is here, down here, over there, it is breaking up the Maori word into 3 parts. What was interesting, as of December last year, the vocabulary for ChatGPT jumped from about 110,000 to about 150,000. And a bunch of those were Maori words. So now it has tokens that are specifically for Te Reo, right? Which it didn't have before. Before it had to do a lot more work in Te Reo. Now it actually has Te Reo is part of its vocabulary, which is really interesting. But the idea is like words like government, token 6,000, why is 110,000. So you've got these Māori Te Reo tokens spread out throughout the vocabulary. So it turns words, and if it doesn't know a word, it cuts it into bits and turns each bit into a token. It then sends those tokens to what's called a latent space. It turns those into an embedding. Now, an embedding is where you take that token, that number, that word, like the word him, and you turn it into a whole bunch of floating point numbers. It's a vector in a really big multi-dimensional space. And you might, if you take the word him and the word her and you turn those into vectors, you can see these two numbers, the first two numbers almost identical. These two numbers are a little bit different, but it's still like 0.01. So it's not very different. These two quite similar. These two a bit different, right? So what it does is it turns each of them into a point in this multi-dimensional space. So if we look here, you can see the difference between man and woman is similar difference between king and queen. And so what this does is it is representing each word as some combination of features. And when you look at the difference between two very similar words like man and woman, and you take that subtraction, you take the difference, and you add the difference between man and woman to the word king, you end up very close to the word queen, because it's got these conceptual relationships have been stored in the numbers. Now these are 4,000 numbers long now, right? You used to get ones that were 100 or 200. Now it's 4,000. We don't know what each of them individual parts mean, but the idea is that the concepts that the language models are working on are these extracted sub-symbolic. They are individual components of those words. So when I say something like the old man's glasses are filled with whiskey, I might have those tokens being 791, 2, 3, 6. And the word glasses, when I say the old man's glasses are filled with whiskey, you might be thinking initially the old man glasses, you might think like spectacles. And then filled with whiskey, you might think, filled means it's going to be a tumbler. And then whiskey says, yep, no, definitely filled with a tumbler. However, if I changed this, so filled doesn't quite tell you that it's going to be a glass, because if I do this and go, the old man's glasses are filled with tears, now halfway through, the meaning of glasses has changed. So, and it's to do with this tears token influencing the representation of the word glasses. Because when we first got that representation of glasses, we had to have something about tumblers and about spectacles. And it's only by its context, by the words around it, that you can work out what it means. And so this is what all the layers of the network are doing, is they're helping it build the context to understand the sentence that it's scanning through, and to work out what the next concept is going to be. And then having worked out the next concept, go and find the token that is closest to that new concept, right? So that's how these language models are actually working, is that they go through and they build up a conceptual representation that has all of the input from the words around it. Now, originally, this was only 6 layers. We're up to 32 layers, probably 50 plus layers in this system. And the attention here, this would be about a 10 token space. These systems can now take in 1 million tokens. And actually, the latest Google one has 2 million tokens. So 2 million words, almost, of context. Okay, so when I talked about embeddings, I said it's in a multidimensional space. So what that means is that I represent the words in something like this kind of space of multiple dimensions, and it's one point in that space. And so other words will be other points in that space, and other concepts will move around in that space. And the prompt you give the AI gives it the context that it uses to build up the meaning that it's trying to find. So if I was to give you some concepts, and we can see how this might work. So if I was to say power, female, you're high on the UK axis, high on a political axis, high on the 1970s, high on the 1980s, what concept might that be? Any guesses from the audience or from the chat? I think I could just hear someone yell out Margaret Thatcher. And indeed, this is the concept Margaret Thatcher. And this was the Margaret Thatcher concept was found by Claude, by Anthropic. Anthropic was actually looking at what concepts are being created in the middle of the network. So they look at how it processes information, and they go into the middle and they said, okay, if we train you to tell us about the concepts that are most active, can we find sentences that trigger kind of conceptual nodes? And one of the 4 million, just the 4 million here, nodes it found was something that would trigger on the word Margaret Thatcher, but also on words like her in a sentence about Margaret Thatcher, because it's not matching the word, it's matching the concept of Margaret Thatcher. And the word her in a sentence about Margaret Thatcher is the idea of her, right? The idea of Margaret Thatcher. It also quite liked the word created for some reason. Again, Thatcher and Thatcher and Thatcher and minister and a little bit about her age. But so the idea is that it's triggering on these similar concepts. So that's what you have to think about this. It's not word search. It's kind of conceptual matching and extending. Okay. Now, that's all well and good for words. Recently, in the last year or so, they've been adding other things coming into latent space. So they have text going into this multi-dimensional representation, and we can get words out. But we can now also put images in, and we can put video in, and we can put tags in about, emotional states of people. Last year before actually, Meta had hooked it up to fMRI, and we're using brain scans, and they were going from brain scans to latent space of the meaning of, thinking about Margaret Thatcher, and then back to brain space so they could work out, can we work out what you're thinking? And then what was like hilarious is that they're then able to take your thoughts, project it into latent space, and then turn that into images. And so you could watch people and see what they were thinking about, which is terrifying. And nobody really wanted them to continue that research because I don't want Meta looking at my brain activity and deciding what images I'm thinking about. This is terrifying. But it is that idea of extracting meaning from a bunch of numbers, right? And that's often what these things are trying to do. We also recently had Sora, which is some of those video outputs. Some of you would have heard about Sora. I've got some examples of Sora we can show in a minute. But Sora, to get the full model, you're paying $200 USD per month for it, which starts to create sort of a digital divide, compute divide, which might be a problem that we're going to have to deal with as a society. I also thought I might say some things about it not being a perfect match reality, because when I'm talking about like language, some things we do in language don't align with what we actually deeply care about. So for example, if I talk in language, the concept of a small number, right? So the number 2 and the number 3 are quite similar, right? They're the concept of a small number, like, the concept of Margaret Thatcher. So I went to town with 3 children and returned with 3 children. That sounds pretty good. I going to town concept, a few children concept, a few kids concept, all matches up. I went to town with 3 children and returned with 2 children. This would be a problem. Except it's I went to town with a small number of children and I came home with a small number of children. So the AI doesn't really mind. And in fact, there's also the whole like, did you come back with the same children that you left with? My wife used to tell the joke of you've got to turn up to the kindergarten early so you can take home the good kids. So it's this, the AI's just their language use doesn't necessarily trigger the right concepts in the right way. And one of the things that the LLMs are pretty bad at is dealing with numbers, right? And accuracy on numbers. Now that's changing, and anything I say is at the moment, because now what the LLMs do is when you ask them a numbers question, they go away, write some computer code, run the computer code to get a number, and then give you that number. So the language model is no longer doing the math. They're actually getting a computer program to write Python to do the math for them. So it's a much bigger system now. So when you're prompting, when you're giving it information, and one of the big things we talk about in LLMs is how good is your question? Now, your question is about giving it the context and priming it and moving the model over to where you want it to give you an answer. So one of the things that most people make a mistake with is they write a very short query and it gives them back a fairly generic-y sounding Americanish voice. And it's kind of bland and mostly meaningless because they haven't given it enough context to give it any personality or give it details. So the broader the question you put in, the more information you put in the context, the better answers you get out of AI, and the more you're able to move it to where you want it to be, rather than leave it in the center and have it that bland, averaged of the internet voice. We've also, in the last couple of months, we've started seeing the release of reasoning agents. Now, what these do is on top of, finding out the word to use, these ones now, instead of just giving you an immediate answer, they go away and they think to themselves for a while. They use words, language, to do some thinking and think about what they're going to answer and then give you an answer. This is what's called inference time compute. The idea is that rather than studying everything beforehand and having an amazing memory, what they'll do is you'll ask them a question and they'll think about the answer and then they'll give you an answer after they've thought for a while. They give much better results and they hallucinate less. And this means you can start thinking of the AI more as a colleague rather than just a tool. And we're starting to see these agents and these reasoning agents coming through. And so rather than just asking the AI to give you an answer or asking it to say something, what is a better approach now is to push the agent away from the center, ask it to give you opinions from different perspectives. Take those opinions and you place yourself in the center. You are the decision maker. You get it to give you arguments and you choose between them. So you can ask for a disability perspective or a neurodiverse perspective or a libertarian perspective or an ACT member perspective, right? You can ask it to be that kind of interlocutor, someone else you can argue with and present different arguments, and then you make the decision, right? And so this is an important kind of shift away from saying, oh, I ask it this thing and it does what I tell it to now, oh, it will reason through things. It'll have a perspective if I push it away out into some other conceptual space that isn't where I'm trying to be. All right. So this is how you can use AI not to replace you. We're also starting to see those Copilot Plus PCs, which are having the AI embedded. This is something we're going to have to deal with quite soon, is this problem of AIs being embedded on people's machines, right? So it's not something that's just out there on the internet. It is starting to be on every phone, on many PCs. You'll see Apple now have it embedded. You'll find it on your Snapchat, on your Discord, on your Facebook, on even on the Zoom call, there's the AI assistant. So it's kind of entering all parts of society. So it's not something we can just close our eyes to. It's something we have to deal with. I've got links to lots of models. Some of you might have noticed that Grok 3, which is Elon Musk's XAI, was released earlier this week. It's very good. It seems to be better than O1, the ChatGPT, better than DeepSeek. But there's lots and lots of these models, and they keep getting better. So you can't kind of go, oh, it's only this good. And in fact, one thing I'd say, you can't say what AI can't do. You should only say, I've seen it do this. I don't know if it can do that. Right? Because it's changing so fast and moving so quickly. So there's lots of things we can talk about, but I thought I'd show some scary examples before we get into policy talk. So lots of voice cloning, lots of AI agency stuff, scary things like we think that general intelligence, AGI, sometime between now and 2029. There's a bunch of people who say there's a 50-50 chance by 2028. So that's where we have AIs that can do everything that's commercially valuable to do cognitively. So we haven't got many years before the AIs can think as well as the majority of humans. Now, what I thought I might show, if this works, is jump into NotebookLM, and I created a Labour Party manifesto in NotebookLM. So if you haven't I can't see the hand, so I'm going to have somebody tell me how many people. Have people played with something like NotebookLM? How many people in the room have played with NotebookLM? I can vaguely see a couple of hands. Okay. I'll assume it's only a couple of you. NotebookLM, so this I gave sources of the Labour manifesto, the latest news from the Labour Party, our constitution, and our policy. Now, these are all publicly released documents, so I'm not sharing anything private with it, but so I did that. Now I can chat to it about our 23 manifesto, the latest news from the party, and those sort of things. So I can just write in a, what were the, yes, does the key policies, and it will chat to me about the key policies as a Google, right? So we talked about equity and inclusion. What's very interesting, and I don't know, we'll have to see if this audio works, but there's a studio here where I can play the click to load the conversation, so I can load the audio conversation that I had with it. Now I'll just check in my sharing setting if I am sharing audio. Let's see, share computer sound, stereo high fidelity. So that should now be sharing. So this was the podcast that
All right. Welcome back, everyone, for
Can you
another
hear that?
deep dive.
Yeah.
And today we're tackling a listener request, getting into the nitty-gritty of the New Zealand Labour Party.
Okay, so you guys can hear that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
What's even freakier is having played
They
that,
sent over a whole bunch of stuff.
I can then
Their
click
2023
interactive mode, which stops it, and then I can start playing the conversation.
All right. Welcome back,
And I
everyone,
can
for
join
another
it.
deep dive.
Yeah. Whoa. Did someone just break the fourth wall?
And so
Let's hear it.
I'm jumping in and saying, hey, what we're really interested in is about how the Labour Party might be able to deal with artificial intelligence. So what do you think's going on?
That's a great question.
Yeah, very timely.
Well, their manifesto does touch on AI.
Okay.
They mention a plan to help the economy,
Okay.
as well as health and education tap into AI,
So it's across the board
while also having to just transition,
for those affected. Right.
which we were just about to get into.
Perfect segue.
They also want to work with agencies.
Okay.
So laws fit in AI.
So I'll stop it there. So as you can see, that was an audio podcast of two AI generated people having discussion about our Labour Party policy. I could jump in and ask questions, and they would respond to me in near real time. Right? This is a really unusual and interesting way of interacting with documents. If I can put the Labour Party policy up there and have these two agents just sitting there having a conversation about it, and I can jump in and say, hey, I wonder what the Labour Party is thinking about, the railway system. And it's kind of, they're going to chat to me about the context of our manifesto and our latest news releases, right? Because I gave it news releases. And I asked it about, and if I press play here,
I whirl, but not stifle things.
I can say, hey,
yeah,
what about boot camps? What's happening around boot camps?
Boot camps, huh?
Right. Another hot topic.
Well, according to their website,
Yeah.
they're not exactly fans of the current government's approach.
How so?
Labor's saying the government is being secretive
Okay.
about how these boot camps are running and pushing ahead without being transparent.
Interesting.
Okay, so that is where it's using the latest press releases from the Labour Party's press releases to extract what the spokesman was saying about, asking questions and them not being transparent, and then including that in the conversation, right? So there's this really neat way that you can use AI to interact with information in new ways. And that's completely free, right? All of you can go away, play with Notebook LM from Google. So, you are sharing content internationally, but it's a freely available tool. We're moving towards AI. We're also moving towards artificial superintelligence. And that's where the AI starts advancing so quickly that we don't know what it's doing. And we can't understand the communication between the AIs because they're now talking to each other. Now, we're almost getting this with HR, because in HR, what we've got is people are sending in CVs written by AI, right? So you get or updated by AI. So you get your CV, you get your job description, and you say, hey, ChatGPT, take my CV, take this job description, write a cover letter for me. And the AI writes a cover letter and say, and can you shrink my 10-page CV down to a 2-page CV that aligns with this job description? And then it rewrites your CV into a 2-page CV, often sounding awfully confident about how wonderful you are. And you can now, instead of taking, submitting to one job a day because you're writing cover letters and you're reading about the job and you're trying to rework your CV to make it fit the job well, you can now do 10, 15, 20, 50 applications per day to jobs, which means the HR department at businesses are getting flooded with job applications, which means they then use AI to process those job applications into bullet points and a list for me as an HR manager. So actually, I'm basically taking bullet points, turning them to a language which the AIs are creating to talk to other AIs, which are then turning it back into bullet points, right? And so at some point, the AIs are just talking to each other and we stop listening and we're just looking at the endpoints. And once that happens with other forms of communication, we're taken out of the loop. That's kind of scary. Okay. Well, I said that, I'll talk for, and I'd meant to talk for about 20, 30 minutes, but I've talked for 40 minutes. Well, actually, no, I probably only talked for about 30 minutes. So I thought we should get into some policy stuff, but also have a little bit of a Q&A to see if there are thoughts you have or questions you have from the audience, or anything you'd like me to go over a bit more. Or shall we get straight into policy stuff?
Simon, do you want to do questions at the end?
We can do some questions at the end.
And Paul Tudor downstairs will manage the questions at the end.
Fabulous. That sounds very good. So one of the things I'm personally concerned about, and I started saying this during the election, was what I'm seeing coming through is the potential for an apathy epidemic. And high school teachers have already said they're seeing this with TikTok, is people abdicating thinking because TikTok just gives you the next piece of entertainment. So you don't have to make choices about what will entertain you. And there's a bit of of a potential for once AI is doing the thinking for you, you abdicate that part of the brain that makes decisions. And so I'm worried that we're going to lose about 30% of the population to apathy, where they'll just stop critically thinking, stop making decisions. They'll just let AI make all their decisions, and they'll just, watch TikTok and let the algorithm work and just disappear into consumption without thought. And I see that as kind of the new obesity, is that some percentages now in some countries it might be 60 or 70% of the population will lose. In other countries we might keep critical thinking alive, so we might lose fewer. But I think that's one of the health crises that are going to happen with thinking AIs. Policy implications, right? So I thought I'd break this into some areas and get some people, ask them questions, get some thoughts around different parts of policy that we write. So tertiary. Already AI is at PhD knowledgeability across all fields. As the knowledge economy is supplanted by AI, because like some of the economic policy, you'll see people saying, oh, it's going to make us much more productive and add value. The problem is when you bring in a resource that devalues a resource, right? So if you bring in synthetic materials, suddenly the wool price drops because people don't need wool anymore, right? So it doesn't increase the value of the thing you currently have. A cheap replacement often devalues the product you currently have. If that happens, and it looks like that is starting to happen, tertiary education, particularly the current style of university education, stops being a transactional part of a knowledge economy where we justify spending a huge amount of money on tertiary education because it generates taxes and brings us money back by upskilling people. It is now something we do as part of a kind of well-being economy because it makes better citizens. It's basically everybody is doing a philosophy degree. And everybody is doing it because they love thinking about the things they're thinking about. So you do computer science, not because you're going to be better than the computer at programming, but because you are passionate about learning that field. Right? That's a really different way of thinking about tertiary education. It's almost going back 200 years and saying that, everybody goes to university for self-development rather than for careers. I'll answer Deborah in a bit. So secondary school stuff. AI is now more knowledgeable than teachers about the subject areas. So this will change some of those subject specialty teachers into can be almost anybody augmented with the right kind of AI. And the teacher doesn't have to necessarily be the expert anymore because the AI is capable of doing that. However, the AI doesn't care about you the way a human does. And so it's actually the interpersonal relationships that become even more critical. And so what we're thinking about there is that being physically present is more about the mentorship, the accountability, the motivation. Those are what teachers will bring. And we move away from content knowledge into critical thinking and about meta knowledge. How do you know what you know, rather than trying to jam as much knowledge in my head as possible? And we need to move away from extrinsic thinking, where we force kids to learn things because they need to know that to be productive in society, because in fact knowing stuff doesn't make you productive in society, into intrinsically motivating. Why do you want to learn things? How do you find what you want for these super intelligent AIs to generate for you? Because if I ask the AI to do some cognitive task, it will do what I asked, which means I have to be certain of what I actually want. And primary school, we're looking at things like an AI per child. It can adjust challenges to the capability per child, this very personalized education. And again, they're like gym instructors. They're there for well-being, not to make productive cogs in an industrial education. Basically, we have to deindustrialize education and make it about the individual rather than make it about building a productive society. So this is a kind of cognitive shift, and policy needs to be thinking about how do we deal with that change to education. Economically, we're going to devalue the knowledge economy. So there are a bunch of economists who are saying that they see it adding value. I have some significant problems with that, because when you decrease the value of something by making it almost free, then how do you still pay people to do something which you can get for almost nothing? And so that's where we have to start thinking about those just transitions. How do we move away from industries that are being removed and being replaced by AI? And the AIs are cheaper to run and provide better answers than humans. We have to think about the type of demand that in the economy. So when you have infinite demand, so think about, task where doing more still means there's more to do, or finite demand where you have a fixed demand and only a certain number of people can do those jobs. So fixed demand, like number of audits for businesses, for example, right? If you have 1,000 businesses and they each need to be audited, that's one audit per year. If you can double your productivity, then there still might only be 1,000 businesses to audit, right? It isn't like there's an infinite number of businesses to audit, or that they are going to go to 2 audits per year or 4 audits per year as you become more productive. So infinite demand versus finite demand. Automation is also a problem around symmetry, where if we automate one part of the process, we create bottlenecks at other points. And some of our processes are designed around things taking time. So for example, when I ask for a quote for an electrician, it might take me 20 minutes to make the phone call and discuss the problem and go back and forth. If I have to stop that and go, okay, well, I've now got an AI that's going to make those requests, I can now ask for 10 quotes for that one job. But there's still only one job. And so there's no more work being done and productive employment, but everybody's having to do more processing and more information processing and deal with more things. And so that asymmetry is going to be a real problem. And how do we upskill all of our SMEs and all of our businesses to cope with the flood of AI-generated content? And also we have this issue economically. New Zealand has a large number of SMEs. Big corporates can now use AI to make bespoke solutions into niche markets. And so one of our advantages was that, small business could do a bespoke thing for its local community. Now AIs can be used to make competitive bespoke solutions. And that means we have to work out, how do we support those local businesses and emphasize those personal relationships? Last couple, equity and culture. We have the digital divide is becoming the compute divide. When you have access free, $40 a month, $400 a month, OpenAI suggested $4,000 a month as a tier for compute. If wealthy people can have infinite cognitive support and poor people get no support, then this creates a massive divide, and it will just accelerate that sort of K-shape economy where, if you're above the line, you're great. If you're below the line, you're gone. We also have cultural imperialism. Most of the models are in the US. DeepSeek's a Chinese model. They have different ways of solving problems than we do. Language is a Tonga, and that's not respected by these models. We have guardrails which protect from certain types of knowledge, and that's broken. And we have, product placement stuff where what we're starting to see is some of the discussion is that one way to make money, because ads are disappearing through the internet where you go and look at web pages. If AI can give you the information, you stop looking at the ads. And so companies are discussing, can you do product placement where Coca-Cola will buy soft drink words within the AI? So when you ask about soft drinks, OpenAI will just mention Coke more often than other products in its answers. How do we feel about that in terms of commercial hidden closed source models? Do we need to have sovereign AI, right? So a policy where we say we actually need to run open weight, open source, open data models in New Zealand so that we don't have digital extortion where we put our data on a system and for free, and then a year later, having harvested all our information and stored it, they then go, right, now you need to start paying money because we were giving it to you free, but we weren't guaranteeing it was always going to be free. And now they've got it all, we have to start paying up. And if they don't, they'll delete it, or they'll stop giving us access to it, or they'll release it because they're changing the contract. Those are all problems when you don't have control over your data or control over your compute processing. We have some opportunities. So if you're thinking about opportunity, there's green AI. We've got the reason why TY is successful is it is exporting electricity, right? Because that's all that aluminium really is a way of exporting electricity. So green AI, we have the opportunity to do that. We have agricultural AI and tourism AI. So we could actually be leaders in these fields if we invest in building up the AI companies we already have in New Zealand around agriculture. And one of the neat things about New Zealand tourism is people are not going to send their robots on holiday for them. They will want to come and have experiences, right? So people still want experiences. And so we should look at how we integrate our SMEs. There are amazing companies in New Zealand which are hidden, but AI can help raise those profiles if done well, right? And so what we need to do is invest in companies to make them more visible to the AI system. So when someone says, hey, what can I do in New Zealand to an AI, the AI has access to all of those really interesting experiences and can recommend good, well-scheduled tours of New Zealand that people are sharing on social media. And the last one is, do we align with the EU, where they focus on risk and trying to make sure that we don't do things like facial recognition? The OECD, which is kind of a bit of the middle ground on trustworthiness, or current Trump is move fast and break everything. And basically, there should be almost no regulation on AI because companies should be able to make as much profit as possible. I don't think we want the US solution, but we do have to think about what we mean by transparency, what we mean by location of data, what we mean by detecting bias and the rules about biased outputs, and also around what we mean by safe content. Because if we let Americans decide what's safe, we're going to end up with some really unusual cultural imperialism. Okay, so yeah, I will say that I also had some ideas on talent pipelines and cognitive nomadery. So you're no longer able to build a massive cognitive castle. You have to be willing to take the bits that make you uniquely human and move forward with that. And with that, I'll end there. If people want to see the scary human organoids, human cortical organoids, we can discuss that as the scary other side of things. So I'll take questions now, if we've got time.
I thought Deborah Rhodes had a question.
Yes, Deborah did have it. Deborah poked her hand up.
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel a bit cheeky because I can sort of ask Simon any day, but I did just going back to the comment about knowledge. There are a bunch of academics in the UK that dispute that AI is a knowledge model, that actually it is a large language model.
Good question, Deborah. Keep going.
Okay, so in terms of being a language model versus a knowledge model, you have to decide what you mean by knowledge in kind of that discussion. One of the things that is reasonably clear is that a single pass of the language model isn't doing reasoning, right? Because we can see that it is actually just processing the semantic representation and building in one direction towards a similar semantic output. So it's not double checking itself. It's not going back. It doesn't have self-doubt. It's not doing a lot of things that we would do when we say that we know something. It's because we've usually brought multiple pieces of evidence. We've kind of checked them. We've thought about them. We've considered them. So it's not doing that. However, the R1 models and the DeepSeek and the O3 are now doing self-reasoning, where they actually talk through the reasoning process. So they are having an interesting version of an internal monologue, but written out on paper. And where it gets particularly, and that's still just language based, so it's limited by it being language. However, with the R2 model from Google and more of the Optimus model from Grok and from xAI, where they're putting the large language models into robots and having them physically interact with the world. And they're also starting to show that by having physical representations of the world along with the language model, they then start to look like they're having theory of mind, physics models of reality, and starting to do interesting cognitive tasks. Now, there's one of my cheeky questions for the audience as well is, given, and this is beyond the pale and not something we need to think about this year, but we might need to think about soon. Given New Zealand has a legal framework around giving human rights to mountains and rivers, at what point do we say that these inanimate entities have enough intelligence to give them rights and to emancipate AIs? Do we ever do that? That's a kind of an odd question, right? Do we emancipate the AIs? Are they part of the system, or and do they become citizens at some point in the future? Okay, I can actually stop the share for the moment. And you can have the big version of me. So, other questions?
Hi, it's Robert Howell speaking. Just a quick response to your last point, but then I have another question. And that is, we do give animal rights. And so the question is, what's the difference between animal rights and human rights? And you could suggest that AI has the same rights as some animals, and there's a scale of how that right sort of increases and decreases. So that's what I would throw out as an initial response. But my real question is, I think Labour Party policy at the moment does support using the OECD guidelines or rules. Okay, now how good are those, and will they really protect us from the extremes, or is AI just another technology? And the technology, the use of technology has ways in which it can be abused. Is AI so fundamentally different that it's cannot be compared to technological rules and protections?
Okay, so Oh, yeah. So I'll just cover the animal rights. Yeah, absolutely. You can look at a scaling of rights, and AI probably is already somewhere in the cat dog rights potentially for the level of interaction. Um, is the OECD guidelines good enough? Probably not. One of the things we've been working on with DIA is around an AI accountability officer for each government department, where there is someone whose job is to look at how AI is being used within the department and to work out, like, can you approve certain usage and do you have to escalate certain uses of AI further up the chain so that we can have some oversight as to how embedded the AI is becoming within our government and within our systems. So the Department of Internal Affairs are looking at that framework, and we've been and Vic's been working with them on that. Actually, it's across the country. We've got academics from Auckland and Canterbury and across the country. So we are trying to work out a framework for New Zealand that's got links to the OECD frameworks and has some parts of the EU frameworks. Are any of them going to be able to protect us? No, not really. The AI is being developed all over the world. It's not just developed here. It will offer, and it will and it will be able to do things which we can't prevent from happening. The best we can do, and certainly with the whole deep fake, I can make fakes of myself. I think the best we can do is to build strong personal communities and have personal connections and build trust within the people that we know, because our reliance on screen-based mediated things like even this, I know some of the people in the room know me, and so probably have a fairly good idea that this is actually me. But it's getting pretty close where I could have just typed this in and have an AI doing the whole talk for me. And it would be hard to know. So I think we have to build strong communities as our only real defense. And then, that's just how we're going to have to manage this. And no matter what regulation we have, we're going to have to deal with the fact that cognitive work is being able to be done by the AIs, programming is done by the AIs, concept art, audio, anything mediated by a computer is going to be able to be done by the AIs. And are there any jobs that won't be affected by AI? Yep, I would say about a third of our jobs are going to be affected by it in the next 5 years. Then we look at having the robots coming in and doing probably another third of the tasks that we currently think of as economically valuable. Where we're safe is the jobs that are safe are jobs where people care that you are a human being, right? So they're not as interested as, is this the best possible output? They're interested in, is this a person who I'm dealing with? So, for example, most people buy shirts which aren't handmade, they're made by a machine. Do I think about the machine versus a human to, weave the fabric? No. Is there a bespoke tiny section of the community that cares that it was hand stitched by someone or hand woven? Yeah, but it's a tiny, tiny, tiny section of the marketplace. And I don't think there's enough economic value there for us to have a thriving economy. So we need to find things like watching rugby. Rugby is not about a ball moving around a field. Rugby is about human beings engaged in a contest against other human beings. So it's those sort of things. You go to a play not because it's the best way that that's been done, but because it is that personal connection to humans. So that's what we need to be emphasizing. And in fact, I'd say that that's probably, unfortunately, what we need to be emphasizing at university at exactly the time when this government seems to be decreasing the emphasis on humanity and our actual value independent of AI automating all of the cleverness.
I'm an actor. I was talking with a casting director. She said within 5 years, television ads, which are a source of income, because actors don't earn much from acting in plays, quite frankly. They've been supplementing ourselves with TV ads and things. They will all be AI generated. The actors in America are fighting because their work is being used to farm farmed by the AI companies, so they're trying to insist that they be paid for that farming process. Do you agree that we'll be in this bizarre world with the ads that we watch, pretending with pretend humans in them, will be some kind of weird? I think of the Stepford Wives, or that film where the guy was living in a dome. What is it? The Prisoner, but also the Canadian comedian was. Sorry, forgotten the name of the film.
I remember the one. I've forgotten the name of the. Yes, we are going to be in that bizarre world, and you already see like some of the Super Bowl ads were AI generated. Coca-Cola's done some AI generated stuff, and that's this generation of AI generation, and it's not great. But when you look at Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes and Avatar 2, we already have synthetic ways of creating behavior. And in fact, some of the better ones aren't the direct AI generation of images, they are AI controlling game engines, which then create adverts. Yes, that is absolutely going to happen. There are some challenges around how you regulate the payment to actors. So the Scarlett Johansson stuff is working through the courts. But the problem with having someone like Scarlett say, look, the voice you tried to use is too similar to my voice, is that voice was generated from another actress. And the problem is if you carve up audio space and say, this famous American actor owns all of this Midwest accent, and these famous New Zealanders own all of the New Zealand accent male voices that sound somewhat similar to them. Then a new actor comes along, they can't earn money as themselves because their voice is now owned by a previous person. So that's a real challenge on how do you prevent AI from producing human-like text when other humans generate something that sounds similar to you. And in fact, we're now at the point where you can't tell the difference between the human generated and the AI at the top end. And that's just going to become the middle end and the bottom end. So no, we're absolutely actors lose, advertising, copy editors have already lost a lot of the work on, real estate ads and things, right? They're no longer written by humans. They're mostly written by AIs. Oxford last year did a survey and found 57% of all content being added to the internet was AI generated. So we can expect that to already be 60, 70%. I would expect probably 70% of all of the consultations submitted for the Treaty Principles Bill were AI generated. So anywhere you have content being generated now, AI is going to be generating that content. And the only way we have as an actor is that people value your humanity and care that it is actually a person doing something. We don't actually care about ads. And so unfortunately, that is disappearing. And that's why we need to have thoughts about just transitions. How do we move into a world where it is very difficult for humans to earn money by being clever?
If someone wants to give make a question, can you come down to the front maybe? Because this lead is not very long.
Right.
Hi, Simon. It's a slightly different topic, but this all requires energy, electricity, and we just had a dry winter. We reverted to coal. So even if Chat GPT or whatever, AI doesn't use all of our power, we are moving to a more electric economy, and there's no sort of, doesn't seem to be any overview looking at New Zealand as to how we can double our energy in the next 30 or so years, which is apparently what we're going to need. So, imagine if we had all moved to all of these things, and there's an earthquake and the power goes out for a considerable amount of time. It just feels we're going to be so reliant on electricity. That's my fear, not the
So what we can do now, and although using the internet and using the models online is the easiest way of doing them, already the DeepSeek is open source. You can download it and you can run it on a laptop. If you have solar panels, you can run your laptop from the solar panels, and it won't use more than other home appliances. So we can already now kind of distribute the AI into the community, disconnected from the internet, and run from solar panels or run from wind turbines. We probably need, if we're going to actually compete in this space, we probably need to double our renewable energies within about 10 years, not within 20 or 30 years. So by 2035, we probably should have doubled our electrical generation, which is an enormous target and nearly impossible. And so we should be massively investing in electrical generation, because that is going to be something that we will be able to use to increase basically the equivalent of the number of people here without having to use up more housing and more hospitals and all of the cost of having humans do things, because the AI doesn't need those. So yeah, absolutely, we should be moving to renewables, moving away from coal.
I hate to interrupt you.
Yep.
We're going to have two questions, and I feel like Woody Allen in the movie Annie Hall, because I happen to have an energy expert standing right beside me here, and he's going to tell us,
that's a different lecture, but rest assured that can be solved, but let's put that to one side. I have many questions, but just stick to one. So how does education work in this environment, right? So I'm a teacher. I've got students of whatever age, and I'm trying to teach them whatever skill or behavior is required in this new world. But then other than physically doing something in front of me, everything they're giving me back in terms of me assessing their skills is AI generated, so it's not them. So how does education actually work?
So there's multiple approaches that are being used out there. So Sydney has moved to what they call 2 streams. So one stream is where you give people homework to do, and you never trust anything that comes out of that. All of that is formative. So they do it, you give them feedback. If it wasn't them, doesn't matter. And they have a second stream, which is the in-person assessment, where you have them in front of you and you talk to them, and that's the only assessment you can trust, right? So that's how Sydney's gone. And that's 2 stream is being seen as popular. It means that you don't get to assess very often because you don't have them very often directly in front of you. I looked at that, and so before I'd seen their model, I felt for a university degree, we might just have to basically accredit the final diploma. So we look at what the student claims to know, and we spend a couple of days with them going through everything in their CV, all the courses they claim to have done, claim to know, and we talk with them to understand how deep their knowledge is in each of the areas they're claiming to know, and then we certify them at that point. So because none of the other assessments can count, none of the other assignments are an indication that human standing in front of you actually did that task. They are all just guidance towards making your way to the final assessment, and that big final exam is whether you get the degree or not. And most of the time people don't get the degree because they can't justify all the things they're claiming. So there's that.
Sorry to interrupt, but could you somehow have you assign me an assignment, I sit in a room where the only thing I have access to is a laptop, which is not connected to the world, and you're assessing what I produced?
You can do that, but the problem with doing that is it becomes massively inauthentic, because you'll never have to do that any other time. right? And it's kind of, well, why are you assessing this ability, which is completely orthogonal to anything I'll ever have to do in the future? So, like, that's the part of the problem is, yes, you can assess that way, but your assessment becomes less and less an authentic measure of what a person will have to do. So one of the things that I've been doing is I've cognitively moved everything into group assignments. And so I no longer measure the output, I measure your contribution to the output. So I'm only interested in how you were influencing the final product. Because just as if you have an A student in a group and a C student in the group, if the C student coattails and does nothing, the A student does everything, I will still fail the C student, even though the product was amazing, because they didn't contribute. And if you let the AI do all the work and create something and you did nothing, I will still fail you, even though the product you produced was satisfactory because you didn't contribute to it. So it's that shift away from measuring outputs to measuring contribution and measuring influence. And that is hard to do, right? You have to measure along the process. You have to have what I also can call assessment by consent, where the students agree on how they're going to be assessed and that the assessment is a motivator for them to achieve their goals. And so you have, but which is really hard in compulsory education because people aren't there because they want to be, they're there because they have to be. At university, I can start to do this because I can say, well, if you're not interested in learning, bugger off. But it's that how do you get intrinsically motivated learners? How we're looking at this is saying, well, the AI can convert tasks which we as a society think are interesting to do, or that we want you to know about in terms of critical thinking, and turn those into tasks that are relevant to the individual by translating the description and the structure into a relevant task at that student's knowledge level. And if they can't do it, the AI can make it simpler. And if they can do it, the AI can make it harder until it's operating at about the level that that student needs to cognitively develop. And so that's where I think we get that kind of discussion on how do we turn education from being a transactional part of an industrialized economy into a self-reflecting, I'm doing it because it's making me a better person kind of activity.
We have one last question, Simon.
Yep.
I think it kind of adds on to what you were just saying there, but how do you think this AI is going to impact how we think about ourselves as a society, whether or not we think of ourselves as a part of a community or as an individual?
So I think it allows people to separate out, basically. Some people will isolate themselves and just interact with AIs and disconnect. Other people will feel much more connected to humans and feel that we need to build much stronger connections. So I think it fractures part of society. And yeah, I have serious concerns about some parts of our society disappearing into misinformation, which again is another long debate. But I think what we need to do as a community and people listening is ensure that we are maintaining those human connections, maintaining personal value and valuing people for their humanity rather than valuing them for what they can do for you. Because if it's something you can easily describe and easily define, then an AI can probably do that instead.
And on that note, Simon, this has been amazing. We knew that it would be. I'd love to thank you for this, and maybe we get you back in a week's time, maybe, to update us.
Oh, well, I certainly that's how I was running workshops in my when working with government departments was give an hour and a half, and then a week later come back and do the Q&A for an hour and a half, because so many things pop up. All of this stuff is moving very quickly. We have a meeting in a couple of weeks to discuss AI policy. I was discussing AI policy on Tuesday night around tertiary education and the Education Policy Committee. So we are trying to get some papers out to the party around AI and around education, and I'll be helping write some of the AI components of the education stuff and working on this as policy documentation. We're also working as, should I make more videos, YouTube videos of me discussing these things in wee snippets so that people can point other Labour Party members to and say, oh, like, you have that question? Here's Simon answering that question, and kind of do those little snippets of stuff.
Once again, thank you, Simon. That's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Have a lovely night.
So, just an announcement about future events. Deborah has organised an ETS webinar for the